You said everybody has a grand opera inside of them, and my job is to help bring it out. Say more about that, what you mean by that, and how do you do that?
So I think it's important to be clear about what I mean by that. I think everyone has a rich, often dramatic inner life. And we can only see parts of it. Part of bringing out that grand opera is accepting that you won't know everything, that you will get to know slices of a person. And the more intimately you can know slices of a person, the better you will be at writing about them, the better you will be at knowing them. It's really hard to know if you've gotten to a ground truth with someone. The best interviews are acts of surrender on both sides. And I can only expect this other person to be completely real with me if I am completely with them. And I think that I have gotten almost fanatical over time about when my mind is wandering in an interview. It's like, nope, come back. It's a form of mindfulness, perhaps, but more than anything else, it's a form of respect. I am a person who does believe that what you put into a conversation, you may not get out of it, but you definitely aren't going to have the best quality conversation if you don't bring your full self to it. Conflict and tension can deepen relationships. It's the sort of thing that I think there's an idea that, and this comes from being a journalist, probably journalists are sort of trained to find truth through tension, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, right? Sometimes it sends people away. So I think there's, we've talked a lot about how in soccer, it's sort of like a catch and release kind of thing. Like there's a lot of that in journalism too, where sometimes you have to come to people and be like, let's have like a really nice chat about this theoretical thing. And then there are other times you have to come to people and say, it's time to talk about the hard thing now. And you have to have both.
This is The Revenue Dilemma, a conversation about the hidden drag on growth and what it really takes to break through. Each episode explores how leaders, builders, and operators confront friction, remove blind spots, and convert untapped potential into real revenue and performance. Today's episode is different in the best way. It's a masterclass in perspective, not from inside the operator seat, but from one of the most informed vantage points in the entire technology ecosystem. My guest today is Allie Garfinkle, senior tech writer at Fortune. She covers venture capital, startups, and the power dynamics shaping modern tech. Allie speaks with hundreds of founders, investors, and executives every year. She sees companies at their earliest moments and watches which ones scale, stall, or lose the plot. Her edge isn't theory, it's pattern recognition, built from proximity to the truth. I flew across the country for this conversation because she once shared a profound thought on her personal mission in her work. She said to me, Tony, everyone has a grand opera inside of them, and my job is to help bring it out. This episode is that idea in action, a real-time look at how deep listening, presence, and thoughtful tension unlocks truth. Whether you're interviewing a founder or leading a company, in this episode, we're going to cover a lot of ground. The hidden drag that no one is naming, how post-COVID shifts in behavior, work, and incentives are still distorting growth, and hiring in ways that most companies haven't fully reckoned with. We'll also talk about why hiring feels broken, what's actually changed in talent assessment, and why old signals no longer work, and how founders should recalibrate. We'll talk about signal versus noise in AI, where the AI bubble conversation is lazy, where it matters, and how to think about more clearly about what's real versus overhyped. Customer love as a moat, why founders who can't put customers on the phone early should worry, and why devotion beats optimization. And finally, metrics with meaning, why ARR can be a mirage, and what to ask behind the numbers, and why slope matters more than snapshots. This is a fun, thoughtful conversation about growth, truth, and accountability from someone who sees the whole board. Let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Allie Garfinkle.
Okay, Allie, so excited we're here. I can't believe we made this happen. And we made it happen in like 5 days.
You say, this is the thing, Tony. You've been saying we made it happen. You made it happen. You flew across the world for this. And I'm like, damn, I don't know if I appreciate it. I hope I have something interesting enough to say to justify the trip. So let's be clear for a minute, man. You made it happen.
Well, I appreciate you coming along. Let's say that, right? And allowing it to happen. But I've had something on my mind the whole time that I've wanted to unpack with you and unpack with you live, ideally. And so you said something to me a couple of months ago as we were having a conversation about kind of how you do your job and what you think about. You said, everybody has a grand opera inside of them, and my job is to help bring it out. And I'm curious, like, say more about that, what you mean by that, and how do you do that?
So I think it's important to be clear about what I mean by that. I think everyone has a rich, often dramatic inner life.
Mm,
And we can only see parts of it. Part of accepting that, part of bringing out that grand opera is accepting that you won't know everything, that you will get to know slices of a person. And the more intimately you can know slices of a person, the better you will be at writing about them, the better you will be at knowing them. And I think that it's the sort of thing, the truth is, I actually don't think I'm that good at it, is the honest to God truth. I think it's actually really hard to know people. It's actually really hard to know what questions are the right questions to ask. It's really hard to know if you've gotten to a ground truth with someone. Someone once asked me, they were like, when you've done an interview, do you know you got it right? And I'm like, no, never. Because there's always one more thing I wanted to ask. And this person I was talking to was like, oh yeah, no, but I always know when I got it right. I'm like, well, that's good for you. But I actually will always have more questions. And I think that there are a couple of things that have worked for me. The first thing is I do think it's important to be ruthless with yourself about listening. Our minds wander. That's how humans are. If you're me and you do, I mean, there are days in my life where I've done 12 interviews in a row, sometimes more. Was the look on your face? Are you okay? Did that break your brain slightly?
It did. I was like, that takes a lot of energy and a lot of focus.
Yeah. And it's to the point, focus. And there are times where I've gotten to like interview 8 on that day and I'm like,
oh yeah,
I'm done. I can't continue. But then I remember that the best interviews are acts of surrender on both sides. And I can only expect this other person to be completely real with me if I am completely with them. And I think that I have gotten almost fanatical over time about when my mind is wandering in an interview. It's like, nope, come back. It's a form of mindfulness, perhaps, but more than anything else, it's a form of respect. I am a person who does believe that what you put into a conversation, you may not get out of it, but you definitely aren't going to have the best quality conversation if you don't bring your full self to it. Like, one of the weird things about me is I will not text you back sometimes for extensive periods of time, as you well know. But when I'm with you, I am 150% with you.
Yes.
And it's the sort of thing that part of that is a function of how my job works. I get 500 pitches a week, and that might be conservative, to be honest. Yeah. And I am somebody who needs space to think, needs space to write. So I can't respond to everything, no matter how much I love somebody. But the way I make up for that, the way I learn to know them is that when we're together, I'm completely yours. And I know that that is a promise I need to make good on over and over again. Because no one's ever just going to, I mean, sometimes people will tell you all kinds of things you don't expect, believe me. But nobody's ever going to just, hand you, here's my inner life. Here is a sincere, complicated explanation for why I do what I do. Unless I'm completely with them, unless you look at them and you say, okay, I really genuinely want to understand you. It's how you get people to answer hard questions. There is really something powerful about asking someone something difficult, but saying, look, I genuinely want to understand. Help me here. There's an idea that a lot of people don't like to answer hard questions. And I actually find that that's not really true. Anybody worth their salt, and there are people who aren't worth their salt, but anybody actually worth their salt is able to handle it, especially if it's asked thoughtfully and respectfully. And sometimes the hard questions are, your company did this bad thing and we need to have a conversation. And sometimes it's, look, I don't get why you would even do this in a million years. What is going on? So there's a lot of different kinds of questions. And the goal for any of it for me is to sort of tell stories about interesting people who are doing difficult things. One of my sort of hills I'll die in is I think startup stories are mainstream stories. And I think they have the potential to be if they're told that way, but I don't think they're necessarily told that way. But a lot of startup stories, to bring it full circle, are grand operas. There's risk, there's drama, there are all of these strange casts of characters involved. And often people are doing something weird where you look at it and you're like, wait, what? But it's real life.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. Well, you started with sort of in order to be able to bring out that grand opera, you have to believe that it's there, right? You have to be looking for it. And
I have never sat across from somebody who I couldn't empathize with.
Yeah. Yeah, which I think is fascinating because you're open to that idea and open to letting it out. The second thing I'm taking away from what you said is that now when you're in the conversation, you're there present with the person and with them so that that it makes it easy to come out. And although you are a performer, you're not performing. You know, you're being with someone. And I think that because, again, your background is as a performer to some degree, but you're not performing in the conversation, right? You're there.
Well, it's interesting too, because there are lots of different kinds of conversations. Like I had, back when I was doing broadcast at Yahoo Finance, I had a producer who sat me down and said, some interviews are performance. That's what it has to be. And you have to sit in a certain way and you have to ask a question as succinctly as possible in a certain way because you have 7 minutes and you have information you need to get out. It's it's kind of like a one-act play almost. You only have so much time, and I guess in this case it would be a two-person play, right? And you do have to perform in certain ways. And I do think there is an interesting element of performance in being a journalist because people have expectations for what a journalist is like, definitely. And I think there is a certain kind of sense of wanting someone to fit into the expectation of a journalist a person sees in a movie, maybe. And I do think asking questions does have an element of performance in it. But to your point, it has to be natural. It has to be genuine. How I ask questions has really changed over the course of my career, to be completely honest.
Oh.
At the very beginning, I was 24. I was in journalism school. I had my first internship. I really wanted to ask questions that demonstrated that I knew what I was talking about, which of course I didn't, right? But I didn't want anybody to question it. And now I actually have this rule where I don't ask questions that I don't really want to know the answer to, one way or another. And if there's something I have to ask for a news reason, which happens all the time, I find a way to ask it in a way where I genuinely want to know the answer. Like my favorite is the IPO question. You always have to ask a company that's a late stage company, when are you going public? And I hate asking that question because you know the answer already. You know that half the time they can't say a darn thing, but I have to ask the question, right? Yeah. So I think it's the sort of thing, like I found all kinds of interesting workarounds with people where I'm like, what is the framework that will allow you to feel like the company is ready to go public? And it's actually the sort of thing where you're actually going to get a real answer there. And actually, indirectly, you might get a better sense of the timeline too. But it's the sort of thing that's like, I try to find ways to ask questions even that I know are de rigueur. And I'm not perfect at all of this all of the time, by the way. My mind sometimes wanders in an interview. Sometimes I'll just be like, okay, I just got to do this here. Like, let's do this. But 99% of the time, and part of it has come from being really honest with myself about what's important to me, and what's important to me in interactions with sources, interactions with people, interactions across the startup ecosystem. But I actually genuinely do. I hope that no one I've ever sat across from feels like I've asked things because I had to instead of because I wanted to.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that's the second part of that is like one, being there present to see it and bring it out, and two, to do it with the right intention, from that authentic, genuine place, a generous place. I think that's amazing. Well, you said something that was interesting, that anyone worth their salt can answer the hard questions.
Absolutely.
What makes them worth their salt? Like what allows that to happen? What are they doing and who are they that allows them to be that and do that?
Oh, that's interesting. So it's different for everybody, but I would say there are a couple of things that are always true. And this is actually true of the best business leaders in my experience with them. And I should be clear to anyone watching this, I've never run a business. I'm a journalist. I'm a writer. I am very aware I am not a practitioner of what you do, but I come from an entrepreneurial family. I massively admire entrepreneurs, and I'm very aware I don't do it. But I have talked to, in my time at Fortune alone, I've talked to hundreds of entrepreneurs at this point, and hundreds of venture capital investors, and hundreds of more folks probably across the private markets. There was a period at the very beginning of my time at Fortune where I was taking, I took like 250 intro calls in the first month of the job. And in that time, because people grew up with Fortune, because it has such a great brand name, because it's such a great outlet, folks who were talking to me who shouldn't be talking to me. So I've talked to some very successful entrepreneurs. And the thing that is always true, I will say, is there are people who take accountability, and people who actually are okay with criticism in a lot of cases, or okay with being questioned. And this is a very complicated, slightly contrarian thing to probably say in this environment where I think there's a lot of discourse about how tech leaders don't like criticism. And I think there is a lot of that out there, to be clear. But I think that asked thoughtfully in the moment, a lot of people who are really, truly good at what they do are open to it. They're like, yes, no, please let me explain myself.
Yeah.
So I'd say the common thread is a sense of responsibility, a sense of accountability, a sense of nuance, definitely, in saying, look, I appreciate the question you asked here. I understand why you asked it. I think you're wrong for X, Y, and Z reasons. That's a very different conversation than why did you ask that question?
Yeah.
Because the people who say that, and it does happen, there's a sense of fragility, certainly, which is not good if you are trying to run a startup. I hear. I don't know. That's just what I hear. I hear it's pretty hard. But it's also the sort of thing where they're honest with themselves. And you can't really be honest with other people about the state of your business, about your opportunities, unless you're honest with yourself. And I think that can be really hard. We're all limited by our own perspective. But a lot of these people who are worth their salt that I'm kind of talking about, all across the ecosystem, are people who are very comfortable with being asked hard questions and saying, okay, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Because that actually does happen. Contrary to popular belief, it does happen for all the discourse out there.
Yeah. Amazing. No, I think that's really great perspective, and that offers some advice maybe for folks that are listening, thinking about, their own situation, how they would approach it.
Honestly, I actually have a very strong opinion that conflict and tension can deepen relationships. It's the sort of thing that I think there's an idea that, and this comes from being a journalist, probably journalists are sort of trained to find truth through tension, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, right? Sometimes it sends people away. So I think there's, we've talked a lot about how in soccer, it's sort of like a catch and release kind of thing. Like there's a lot of that in journalism too, where sometimes you have to come to people and be like, let's have like a really nice chat about this theoretical thing. And then there are other times you have to come to people and say, it's time to talk about the hard thing now. And you have to have both. Both are actually essential, not only to, I think, being a good reporter, but having a real relationship with the people that you cover that's thoughtful, where they trust you. Because in the end, the currency of journalism is trust, and it's a very complicated time for that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's maybe transition a little bit. One of the reasons why I was so excited for you to be on this podcast in particular is the perspective and the vantage point that you have. You mentioned that you've not started a company before or run a company.
Definitely
but
not.
You have a place in this ecosystem and universe where you're participating and contributing and also seeing things from a slightly different vantage point. And I always get fascinated, by a painting on a wall that if you just change your position 4 or 5 steps to the right or the left,
Turn the kaleidoscope.
you see something completely different. And so I think this perspective is really important. And you get to see and talk to all different levels of all different industries, sizes, stages of companies. So I think it's really fascinating. So the one question that I have right out of the gate is, what's the hidden drag on growth in companies that maybe everyone is feeling, but no one's talking about?
Ooh, that's really interesting. I think it's important to say there is variation across industries and in all sorts of ways.
Yes.
Like a consumer company can have very different challenges than an enterprise software company. I think it is the sort of thing where, if you're a founder, you're definitely, it hasn't been an easy environment to operate in for all sorts of reasons. And we can talk about like geopolitical uncertainty and certainly around tariffs. And I think there is definitely, and I think that sort of external circumstances in the world right now definitely have affected a lot of companies in a way we're not necessarily talking about or don't fully understand. Like also all this to say, it's important, I think, to say that different industries have different challenges. And especially, it depends where venture capital dollars are going, right? Like, if you're an AI company right now, you can raise around. I was like, I'm going to spend .ai on something and raise some money, right? Like, who knows? But it's the sort of thing where if you're a consumer company, VC dollars haven't necessarily been flooding there. So I think that it's important to sort of just put that disclaimer over there. That being said, I actually think, and this might be an unpopular opinion, I think the sort of biggest drag right now is that we don't necessarily understand how COVID changed society.
Wow.
I actually think that one of the biggest outstanding questions, especially in terms of not just startups, but the world, is how consumer behavior evolved in the aftermath of COVID. Like, return to work stuff actually is still really an open question across a lot of companies.
It really is, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's amazing that it's still an open question.
And it's like there's a lot of, I think, discourse around return to office, for example, and saying it's already happened. But actually, if you talk to anybody out in the world, there are very few companies where that's completely figured out, even now in 2025. Right. And it's the sort, and we remember we all went inside in March 2020, right? Like that's crazy.
Crazy.
And I think that there are actually a lot of long tails of COVID that are affecting all sorts of companies and all sorts of industries. Like if you look at Hollywood, for example, they're still living out the tail end of COVID in so many ways. And I think that is something I do feel comfortable enough to say that is true across all industries. And I think that for a lot of founders, I think that hiring is actually really hard right now. And I think in part because of some of these post-COVID dynamics that are kind of a moving target. But I will also say I do think startup hiring right now is just really hard in general. It's really competitive, especially for a couple of kinds of talent. AI talent has been talked about a lot, but I keep hearing that product, like really talented product people, are in crazy demand, and there aren't enough of them. So I would say that there's a couple of offshoots of sort of post-COVID sociological change that we still haven't figured out. And I don't know. I don't know if anybody's talking about it like that, but I think about it all the time.
No, I think that's brilliant. I did not expect you to go there. And I hadn't,
Pandemic that ended the world, everybody.
but
it's weird. I still think it has long changes. But if you actually look at sort of pandemics of the past, they take actually a long time to sort of settle. So actually a lot of history suggests that we're very much still in a shift that we won't quite know the ultimate shakeout of.
Yeah, I agree.
You really didn't expect me to go there. What did you think I was going to say?
I don't know, but I'm really glad that you did, because I think it's really important. I think what resonates with me is what you said around challenges with hiring. And the one thing I'm seeing is that
hiring is so hard.
It's so hard, especially folks that are kind of were in the crux of their career during that period, because it changed. I had a substantial enough career prior that I kind of emerged with basically the same sort of like muscle memory. It wasn't long enough to kind of change my muscle memory of what was important to me or how I wanted to spend my time, or much of my life I had already sorted a little bit around those things. But as I hire folks that were in the like kind of the formative
graduating college or in college,
or even in the early,
it's crazy.
Yeah, it changed that. So now what I'm finding is I don't know. I have to spend more time getting to know someone's beliefs and incentives and wants and needs, because they're not like easily in a lane or a path that probably prior to COVID, everyone was sort of lining around. Like, this is how you get success. Now it's not clear. The rules of success have changed.
Well, and there's a lot of another unpopular opinion. There's a lot of discourse around Gen Z. They don't get corporate environments. I'm like, of course they don't. The world ended at their most formative years. What do you expect to happen?
Yes.
But it's sort of, and it's the sort of thing too. The thing I hear over and over again from really great founders, from really great investors, is that hiring is actually, in a lot of ways, the most important skill any entrepreneur can have.
Yeah.
It is the difference between success and failure. It is the difference between followership and sort of ending up in Nowheresville, wherever that may be. It's vitally important and also very hard to teach and requires trial and error.
Yeah.
And this is an environment where, because of so many of those dynamics shifting, because of stuff around AI, I think assessing talent is probably really hard, because, I mean, the thing I hear over and over again is that there was a time in like maybe the 2010s where you could say someone did 6 years at Meta and that means they're qualified to do X. And now it's actually unclear. In the middle of all of these other sort of broader changes that are happening on a societal level, on a technological level, there's definitely a sense that what it means to assess talent now is changing. Like, it's just because someone did 6 years at insert big tech company here, it doesn't mean they're not qualified for the next 10 years in AI.
Yeah.
Right. Which I think is a thing I hear a lot, and is it's kind of, it's vibes. The answer is vibes, which is not a good answer.
No, it's great. So on the same thread, so if that's the conversation that needs to come out that we aren't talking enough about, which I agree totally, and you just made me like take a step back and feel some of that. What's the conversation that maybe is a bit played out and like it's diminishing returns? Like, we're not getting any benefit from rehashing it and debating it and discussing it. What do you wish would just sort of go and sunset into the background for a little bit?
Oh, what am I super over? What am I like, do we need to keep talking about this?
Yeah.
It's funny. Every time I think I've had it with there are certain conversations that I think every time I've had it with a conversation, I'll take a new turn and I'm like, like I was thinking about, I was talking to someone recently about the conversation around prospective NVIDIA challengers recently.
Okay.
And I was like, I'm kind of over it. Like, aren't we done here? Like, don't we know that NVIDIA is in charge, sort of, kind of, especially as long as we're talking about training. And then that AMD deal came out a couple weeks ago with OpenAI. And I was like, they're crushing it. I'm a big Lisa Sue, if you're ever listening to this, I'm a huge fan of your work. Actually, it's an insane thing to say. I've admired her career in a lot of ways and think she is a fascinating character. But it's the sort of thing where a lot of conversations that I think I'm over it, I'm done. I will say, I don't think we're getting anywhere. I'm not over the conversation because I think it's an important conversation to have. But I actually do think we need to sort of take some new looks around sort of the discourse around a bubble. Because I do think that, like, right now there are a bunch of different stories, coming from myself included, that are like, we're in a bubble. And it's like, duh. Okay, like, duh. That makes sense. Of course we're in a bubble. I mean, just by historical trends, that makes perfect sense. And there are going to be people who watch this who are like, AI is not a bubble. And I'm like, sure. Sure. But I actually think that this is something I heard Sam Altman say in a press conference when I was in San Francisco recently that I thought was really interesting. He was like, he admitted, he was like, there's a lot here that's bubbly. And of course, when pressed, he didn't necessarily say where he thought things might be bubbly. But I actually think the next sort of step is figuring out where things are bubbly, what actually is overblown versus what's totally real.
I think that's a really
like, I'm not over the bubble conversation. I want to continue having it, but I'm sort of done saying, with it. I'm done calling a bubble. I think it's obvious, and I don't think it's an interesting thing to say at this point. I think it's actually important to be very critical about what parts of AI we're really talking about.
I think that's just brilliant because, I was at Brainstorm Tech and had a phenomenal time there.
Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for inviting me. So you made me think because I had the opportunity to come to Brainstorm Tech and really loved all the dialogue, loved the people I met. It was just an incredible experience and really mind-opening. But it was sort of unsatisfying, the conversation around the AI bubble, because it sort of netted out as like, yes, we are, but there will be winners, so both can be true. And it was just sort of as like an unsatisfying place to land.
Well, and I think that the thing that's going to be really hard is, nobody wants to say, I think my company is maybe part of the bubbly part. Everyone's got to sell their, sell you their bag of goods, right? But I do think, like it's the job of journalists to do some really critical inquiry there. And like, I think that's the next phase. And I do also think that the rubber's going to meet the road on some of this.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think it's inevitable. And it's sort of, and again, it doesn't mean AI isn't real. The internet was very real too, as far as I can tell. So it's the sort of thing that I think that, I don't know if there are ever satisfying answers. Like, I think about this all the time about how, a lot of journalism is opening up a box and not knowing what you're going to find, or trying to find the right box to open. And you open up like 20 of them. You're like, none of those was the right box. Well, okay, I guess I need to go open more boxes or move on to the next one because maybe there's not a there. But with this, I know there's a there. So it's the sort of thing, it's now on me and people like me to go, okay, where is this actually working, where it's not? I think it's part of why that MIT study really made such waves. Because however you feel about the methodology, and I know a lot of people have a lot of criticisms of it, it did hit a nerve where people are like, what if none of this is working?
Yeah.
Right? Which is the underlying anxiety, which I think is a very fair anxiety. Of course, some of it is going to work. And I think it's both on us to figure out where things are working, where things have the potential to work. Because I think actually there's I was talking to a VC recently who's very critical of other VCs not giving companies that are struggling enough time to figure things out. Like, I think especially in a world where some of these companies like Lovable or Cursor are coming up with ARR numbers that are astonishing. Right. I do think there's a lot of pressure to figure it out all immediately. And I think there's going to be companies that look like winners now and will be winners. I think there are companies that are going to figure some stuff out. And then I think there are going to be a lot of losers. And I think it's the sort of thing that, to me, who the winners are, that will net itself out over time in very public ways, no matter what, because they're all names we know at this point. But those other two categories, I think, drawing the distinctions, I think the difference will be founders in a lot of cases.
What will be different? What will the founders do differently to emerge?
Part of it's just sometimes luck, man. But I also do think it's accountability, it's thoughtfulness, it's a sense that, you're able to change and be honest with yourself about when things aren't working, which I think is one of the hardest things to do about anything, right? Like I say that like it's an easy thing, but it's actually, I think it's really hard, especially with a business, especially if you've raised a lot of money, to say, actually, this whole part of the business that we've been building maybe actually doesn't have a real moat. I actually listened to someone recently told me, he was like, I don't think software has a moat at all. And I was like, whoa, okay. But actually, like, I was like trying to figure out why I had such a reaction to it, because I was like, because maybe there's like a little bit of truth in that. Like all moats are malleable in ways that we don't necessarily think they are. So I think that the difference will be founders. The difference will be that people are on the right side of whatever trend. There will be a little luck, and nobody likes to think about that. But I think that's true. I think that's partially true. Like if you look at the .com boom, part of why Amazon succeeded is because they raised a ton of money right in the lead up, so they were able to weather the storm.
Yeah.
And they maybe had a sense things could go a little south. Things were frothy, but they timed it right.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I think that's great. And look, you answered one of the things on my mind that I really wanted to talk to you about, which was, again, from your vantage point, as you see companies with the story really early on, early momentum, and where they maybe fall short of that potential and lose the plot along the way. So if maybe one of the reasons why that happens maybe is a founder or founding team that isn't willing to hold their hand up, take a step back, and maybe make a different decision, or maybe say they were wrong in a certain point of view or direction and change it. Maybe a little bit of that you just mentioned. What would be another reason that you've seen along the way that these companies that you get to know really intimately just don't pan out the way that you thought it would, or how it looked like? Besides, and we know there's luck involved in all of that, but any other insight that you kind of see from your vantage point when you look back and go, maybe I could have seen that, or yeah, that was that was a possibility given what I saw.
I have an anecdotal answer.
Okay.
There are companies that will sometimes pitch me, and I'll be like, "Can I talk to a customer?" And if the answer is not a resounding yes, that sends up a really serious red flag for me. One thing I talk a lot about is the Bruce Springsteen rule. You have to love your audience, and then that will sustain you over a long period of time, and that love has to be real. This is actually a thing Springsteen talk. I'm a big Springsteen fan. Shocker, I know.
Okay.
And I think that people like VCs are like, the customer love was insane, and it's like, I'm like, okay, whatever. But it's the sort of thing that when someone's very excited to get on the phone with you as a customer, that usually means something. And the way they talk about the product, if it's very specific and it's not vague, like they're not just doing a favor for someone they like, but you can tell if they genuinely use something. Usually it's pretty clear, especially because I often will demand demos of things. Like I want to see things so that I actually can kind of cross-reference. And it's the sort of thing that's like, I think people really really understand their audience, understand what their customers want. And it's the sort of thing that in AI, I think there's a lot of challenges right now because there's just so much spend. Customers are using, like big customers especially, they're trying all kinds of different companies at once. They do functionally the same thing. And I think the way those pan out is going to be very interesting because who's actually going to win? It's going to be the product and the team people like interfacing with the most. Right? It's actually a very simple popularity contest at the end, right? A combination of popularity and results. And I think that it's really underrated, perhaps, to not just have customer love, because I don't actually like know what that means sometimes, because that can mean a lot of different things, but have a very specific set of customers who very specifically can talk about why they use your product and why they like it. And I can tell you as a journalist, to me, it makes a huge difference because it can also, especially for something that's kind of abstract, make it really real.
Absolutely. And it can also provide this, like you said, this center of gravity around what's important. So if the team is talking about the customers and et cetera, the customers are talking about the team, it's like, that's where the center of gravity is in the whole thing. It's not somewhere else. It's probably where it should be. And interestingly, I just sent a video to my team this morning, actually, when I landed at the Industrious down the road. And it was a short video about the trip and some of what I'm here to do. And then I basically told them, I said, just as a reminder, let's cancel out the noise. Let's keep focused on the customer and the problem we're trying to solve, not who's launched a press release or who's got a website with all the things that they do. None of it matters. All that matters is that we're 100% focused on what our customers are trying to do and getting deep with that, right? So I think that's brilliant.
Well, and like this is the thing I think about a lot is you're not going to optimize every interaction, right? You're not going to do every single thing perfectly efficiently with absolute operational perfection, right? But you can always be devoted.
Yeah.
And that matters to people.
Yes.
That really does actually make a difference. That was something that came from a newsletter I read called Brain Food.
Okay.
Not my idea. That's from Brain Food, and I forget who it was who said it, so I apologize. But I thought that was a very powerful insight.
That is.
There's no customer is going to be like, yes, and every single second of this product was perfect. But if you can feel the devotion of the sort of person who's coming to serve you, it does matter.
Yeah, and you're going to stick with it and help build it. Amazing. So, okay, I have one more question for us. What I really want to know, and we talked a little bit about this earlier when we were on the revenue conversation, but what's the metric or set of metrics that you really like to focus on that you believe really tells the story of a company? If we get to the metrics side of what you kind of look at, and where is there maybe a metrics mirage, right? The kind of metrics that maybe throw us off but aren't really part of the core story. I'm curious your take on that.
You're not going to like my answer, Tony. You're not going to like my answer. I think ARR is an exceptionally important metric. Yeah. And I think it can also be a mirage, especially at this moment in the AI boom. I have written now, 2,000 words about this, and I am preparing to perhaps write more. We'll see. But it's the sort of thing that a number is never just a number, right? A number is a series of decisions made by people. And especially in the private markets, it's not, there's no gap. The SEC is not checking it. You've got to just believe what people tell you. It's hard for me to unequivocally, when someone brings me an ARR number now, I'm sort of like, what actually does this mean? And they're like, well, it's ARR. I'm like, no, what does it mean? Are there pilots included in here? Are there one-time revenue deals? I need you to help me out here.
Or is this GMV or ARR?
Yeah,
Let's be clear.
Yeah, what are we talking about here? Please help me. Yeah. Help me understand. Because and again, I don't ask the question derisively. I actually want to know because I do think it matters, and I do think people are uncomfortable with being forced to articulate some of that stuff. I will say I'm always interested in any metrics around churn or retention. Part of this comes from being in media. I think that it's very important you retain readers, right? But also it's, I think, sort of indicative more than other things of not only how much somebody loves something, but how much you can get people to sort of say yes and then continue saying yes. So anything people give me around retention that there's reason to trust, I'm like, oh, okay, now we're in business here. Yeah. I also have become increasingly interested in anything that gets at unit economics. One of the things people talk about in AI is follow the tokens, right? And the unit economics of a lot of AI companies are really tough because you're sort of beholden to a lot of the foundation model companies. Everyone's struggling to find compute. It's tough. But anything that gets at unit economics, I think also is something that I feel very interested in. Again, though I'm a bad person to talk to in certain ways about this because I love the numbers, but I also know very acutely that they're not a monolith. Yeah. And it took me a long time to fully understand that. And I think I say I fully understand. I don't even know if I fully do yet. But I do feel very strongly about being thoughtful about where some of these numbers come from and asking for transparency on them as well, which is a process that sometimes people are very amenable to and sometimes they're less so, Tony. But I will say the most important thing, and I'm sure this comes full circle, right, is metrics are part of the story of a business. But they actually aren't the whole business because in the end, if you've used a bunch of, one-time deals to drum up some revenue numbers that look pretty impressive, the story you're going to be able to tell isn't that great.
Well, you just bring up something really important. It makes me think of, I was in a business that was doing predictive analytics for higher education and predicting term-to-term persistence, on-time graduation, and then a lot of other work around
many variables.
But many variables, except one of the insights that we gleaned was one of the things that's most predictive to term-to-term retention is not actually GPA. You would think it's GPA. It's GPA slope. So it's actually where it's moving.
That's really interesting.
So I think what you said is super interesting. If you have a business that has 20% churn, but it's always 20% churn because that's the nature of the business. Okay, or if you have, again, ARR slope, one direction or the other. So I just think maybe that is something to add into the mix. Is
well,
the
and it's
directionality over time and space, basically.
Yeah, and it's the
Where's
sort of
it
thing,
moving?
like the goal isn't like, especially if it's a business with churn, the goal isn't no churn, right?
Yeah.
But the goal is that it actually makes sense.
And which direction is it going?
Yeah, and if the and which direction is it going? It gets back to all of the stuff that you believe about how sort of growth is kind of the thing that fundamentally is what makes revenue important.
Yeah.
I think it's the same paradigm, because also like someone who is someone recently said to me, he was like, a very successful investor said, he's like, look, I actually don't care where someone is today. I care about potential for slope.
Yeah.
That's all I care about.
Yeah.
Because actually, if someone is here today and they stay here, doesn't matter. But actually, if it gets to the place where, this person's here and then 2 months later they're here, it's like, okay, now we're getting somewhere. It all goes back to growth, man.
It goes back to growth. Well, look, let's wrap our conversation here. We could keep going forever, and I want to so badly, but it's about time that we wrap this up. So hopefully we'll get another chance to do this again and expand some of these, but I just really appreciate your time.
Of course.
And your insights. They're amazing.
Of course. Yeah. It's such a pleasure always.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Join the Revenue Dilemma conversation. Hit subscribe, share, and like everywhere you listen. It's time we solve the revenue dilemma once and for all.